Lee, movie featuring Kate Winslet, has ties to Cape Cod. Here's what to know. Lee Miller's life and career meandered from fashion model, artist and photojournalist and intertwined with artists such as Man Ray and Pablo Picasso, and it featured a significant Cape Cod connection. Her story, focusing primarily on her years as a photojournalist during World War II, is told in the film Lee, which will be showing at the Cape Cinema in Dennis, starting this Friday, September 27th, and running through to October 3rd. The film, which stars Kate Winslet as Lee Miller, was directed by Ellen Carras in her directorial debut and is adapted from the book, The Lives of Lee Miller, written by her son, Antony Penrose. The film also stars Marion Cotillard, Andrea Riseborough, and Andy Samberg. Miller's life is a fascinating journey from the 1920s through the 1930s to the end of World War II. Need a break? Play the USA Today Daily Crossword Puzzle. It's the story of an amazing person through all walks of life, said Eric Hart, CEO of the Cape Cinema Group Incorporated. She was a model being photographed for Vogue magazine, and then she became a photographer herself, being in World War II in combat situations. After a highly successful career as a fashion model, Lee moved to Paris in 1929 to study photography and eventually collaborate with Man Ray in fine art photography and became part of the Surrealist movement. In 1932 she returned to New York City and opened her own portrait and commercial photo studio. She returned to Paris in 1937, and when the war broke out, she was living in London, experiencing the bombings in the city firsthand. It was then, as a middle-aged woman, began working as a photojournalist documenting the action and the horrors of combat for the British Vogue. Her first assignment was to photograph what was believed to be the liberated town of St. Malo. However, there was still heavy fighting in the area and she took a number of photographs. When it was discovered what had happened, the British did not allow her, as a woman, to go into active combat zones. And that's where the Cape Cod connection begins. She met David E. Sherman, an American photojournalist who suggested that since she was an American, she could get American press credentials, said Roland Sherman, nephew of David E. Sherman. She thought it was a good idea, Sherman said. In an email to the Times, Antony Penrose said, "It was impossible for women to work in the British Army, but Lee recognized that the U.S. Army would allow women correspondents, so she signed up." Samberg plays David E. Sherman, a photographer for Life magazine who was a long-time resident of Cape Cod living in Truro and was an active citizen in the community of Wellfleet. "It was great casting. Andy Samberg looks just like my Uncle Dave," said Roland Sherman, who was very close to his uncle and is a rather famous photographer and photojournalist himself. At that point, Miller and Sherman teamed up, both professionally and romantically. Their professional relationship was important in Miller's ability to get the kind of photographs of the war that she got. Where he helped her was understanding the methods of photojournalism, distinct from fashion photography. He was also able to help her learn battle skills very quickly. "She and he made a good pair," said Penrose. Sherman encouraged her in her writing, was quick-witted and, like Lee, had the gift of friendship. Miller took many photographs of soldiers, combat areas, and of the Dachau concentration camp. Toward the end of the war, Miller may have appeared in one of her most famous photographs. All the rest of the press corps were heading to Berlin for the final showdown with Hitler. They did something counterintuitive and headed for Munich. This gave them first access to Dachau, Hitler's apartment, Eva Braun's house, Berchtesgaden, and Hitler's headquarters in Obersalzberg, according to Penrose. At Hitler's apartment, Sherman took a photograph of Miller sitting in Hitler's bathtub with her boots, dusty from the Dachau prison, lined up in front of the tub. It is believed that Miller then took a bath in that tub. The war, however, left Miller with PTSD, and she gave up photography. Her son, Penrose, said he never knew his mother was a famous photographer in her time. "My late wife Susanna discovered my mother's stash of photographs in the attic of our family home," Penrose wrote in the email. He discovered some of his mother's writing, a vivid account of an infantry assault on a heavily defended enemy position. It was up close and personal. There was no byline, and I assumed it was by some highly experienced life reporter. "It did not occur to me that it could be my mother," Penrose said. It turns out there were about 60,000 negatives and about 20,000 fine prints along with letters and maps and other writings. It took 3 years, Penrose said, to sort out the material which led to his writing his mother.